You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and this is 6 Degrees of John Keel.
Hello and welcome to the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. I'm your host, Barbara Fisher. Today, close to Imbolc, I'm talking with Daniela Simina, and she's been here before, and she just came out with a new book called A Fairy Path, the Memoirs of a Young Fairy Seer in Training. And it's very excellent. We're going to talk about that and probably other stuff too. Welcome, Daniela. I'm so glad to see you again.
Hello. I'm so glad to be back. We had a very exciting episode last time. So many things, questions left unanswered. We just didn't have the physical time, to get into everything. So I'm very glad to be here to continue, in a sense, the discussion that we started last time, but also to bring up new topics and look at fairy magic and what I'm writing about fairy magic from a new point of view, different angle.
Okay.
At that. So, yay.
Excellent. Yeah. We went as deep as we could the first time and not talk for 5 hours, which is... I didn't want to destroy your ability to communicate by making you talk forever. I could have though. I could have talked with you forever and ever. But I'm glad that you came back. Okay. Before we start talking about fairy magic, I want to talk about your book a little bit, and then it's gonna flow. It's gonna come. A Fairy Path is interesting because it is a memoir. And one of my favorite genres to read is memoirs, because I think that the more experiences of humanity that we have, the more we understand everyone and ourselves. The more that we read about people from different places and different cultures who have different experiences than us, the more we see that they are human. And not only are they human, but even if their experiences and culture are very, very different from us, what we learn is that inside we're all the same. We all have the same desires. We have the same kinds of emotions. And that is, honestly, I think that's a really interesting and good way to teach magic, by showing how you got to where you are now. So in this book, you tell from what grade were you in?
It starts with me being in the 3rd grade.
That's what I thought.
And it goes through a good part of 4th grade. So the book packs in what's happening over an arc of about 2 years.
Yeah.
Very dense 2 years.
And that's
2.5 years.
Well, I think in child development speak, those 2 years are pivotal. I really think that those are, your brain is developing at a very fast pace. Your understanding of the world, which you get from context clues most of the time, and from direct teaching from your family, is moving very quickly. This is like what I always said to Morgana when she got older and Fox was a little toddler kid. I was like, they get really interesting. I said, all kids get really interesting around 3rd grade. That's when I was
yes.
not like I didn't like him when he's toddling around and being really cute, but 3rd grade is when they open their mouths and things just come out, where they have learned their own understanding and then they add it to their cultural understanding and weird stuff just pops right out of their mouths and you go, huh, I never thought of that. So let's start with the very first sentence. We're not going to do the whole text like this, people. Don't be all like weird.
I started to worry.
Yeah, it says, there's no such thing as Santa. Can you like elaborate on this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I really should say it wasn't just. It doesn't say there's no such thing as Santa. There are quotes around it. Someone is saying it, and not only is she saying it, she's saying it loudly.
Yeah, it's in capitals, I believe.
Yeah.
So there was this instance in my life when I heard my teacher, so the person talking there is my third grade teacher, yelling at me, "There is no such thing as Santa," and actually slamming her hand on the desk. And she was very, very irritated by the very idea that someone, a child, would bring up the idea of magic. And it may not be very obvious to the reader in the United States or other places around the world why my teacher was so outraged about it. The action in the book is placed in the early 70s when in Romania we had a dictatorial regime. And what a dictatorial regime means is that the people who have the political power, they will tell you how to dress, what you eat, what you believe you are allowed to believe and what you're not allowed to believe, how you should think. And if you do not align, if you do set your toe past the line, you are in trouble. And trouble ranges from consequences, like a child could have been placed in an institution to be re-educated, rehabbed. For an adult, that could be prison, or again, conversations to help the adult involved clear up their mind and sort out the healthy from the unhealthy ideas. And the healthy, making here bunny ears, by healthy, it was intended what the political party was considered healthy. So with all that in mind, I can now, looking back, I can understand my teacher's outrage, because she was concerned that such a deeply mystical little being was emerging, was blossoming right underneath, in front of her in her class. So she was concerned, but as the reader, I hope the reader will have the curiosity to follow through the pages of the book, will discover that my teacher herself was one of those honest believers in how sound and good that regime, political regime, was. And she was like this fervent preacher of the values that the dictatorial regime in Romania back then was representing, embodying, and trying to really instill into the citizens since the earliest possible. Like, and as you, Barbara, said, third grade childhood is a time when children are primed to absorb the world through either what they experience and what they are taught. So those are formative years and are crucial. Now, you might be wondering at this point how even the discourse of Santa came about. And without giving here too much of a spoiler, I want to say that I had my own experiences and perceptions and sightings and interactions. So this goes beyond just imagining or, oh, I think I saw something in the corner of my eye. I had my share of experiences since a very young age, since as early as I can remember, I can say. And I was trying to, in my child's in my mind as a child, I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And when I encountered this, what appeared to be like a gentleman dressed in a certain fashion, and because it was very early, it was the last day of November, I will never forget that. That's like etched into my memory. Late November, now this is a time when in Romania we have like the first snow falling, and that's deep, massive frost in most of the areas. So my mind combined, put two and two together, the apparition plus the time of the year, and I said, okay, wow, cool, that might be Santa Claus. So I went around, telling, it's like, hey, I saw Santa Claus. So, it's not like we are told those things don't exist because I just saw him. So that kind of gives the idea what kind of experiences and sightings I was having. And to make things even more confusing for the reader or for the listener right now, I'll go ahead and say that I grew up with my grandmother, so she lived with us, and she was a practitioner of folk medicine and a fairy seer. And now I'm just visualizing, I have this image of the audience going, oh, what do you mean? You grew up with a fairy witch, with a medicine woman right there, and there was nobody to tell you about Santa Claus and what were you seeing and what is what, and help you disentangle your own experiences. And the answer here is twofold. First of all, I thought that all children can see what I'm seeing. Like, I remember one day walking into the classroom and telling everybody, hey guys, my cat was glowing blue this morning. What colors do your cats glow? I leave it to everyone's imagination to figure out what happened, given the context that I just gave, about a very strict, and I was very upset. I'm like, either everyone's better than myself at keeping it a secret, so they don't like to talk about what colors their cats or dogs are glowing. So that's one aspect that I couldn't fathom from the very beginning, that not everyone was perceiving this kind of things the way I did. And the other thing, my grandmother herself was trying to keep me away. When she was doing her charms and her healing magic and all those rituals, and she's really trying to keep me away. There was a time I could remember when I was like very, very little, like toddler age, when I was crawling into the spaces where she and her friends, her ladies, were doing things, and I was sticking my nose into everything. But then I also remember a time when she started to push me away. And I was really, really frustrated. So grandma was there. Basically, my source of knowledge and potential answers was right there with me. And yet I couldn't reach. What this led to, I started to do things by myself and trying to figure out what I was seeing, what I was doing, what I was. And I was getting myself into trouble, talking to the wrong people, asking the wrong type of questions, people from outside the house. At which point, my grandmother realized that it's better if she begins to discuss with me about certain things, because having these, she called them magical gifts. So having these magical gifts could have gotten me into trouble, and I actually did get in trouble more than once.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, they're gifts, and I could have been taught to use them better in useful ways, in productive ways. So she steps in basically to protect me and making me aware that this is not something to toy around with, the consequences can be very, very serious, ranging from mild discomfort to death. I know it's a broad spectrum, but I'm not exaggerating. Now, grandmother, this is to tie back to the beginning of our discussion when we mentioned the problems arising from living under an authoritarian regime. So grandmother, one of the reasons that she didn't want to teach me more, was that as a kid, I would have probably went around speaking and sharing with my friends, little friends, what did I learn and what fabulous things can I do or not do, which would have spelled trouble for the whole family and get us the wrong kind of attention from authorities, which, by the way, if you read the book, that actually does happen at some point. So we had the Romanian security services stepping in. So not fun. So that was the reason why she was concerned about teaching me. On the other hand, she had to, because I was a danger to myself and others. And teaching was the best way out of the situation.
Yeah. It took her a little bit to come to that conclusion, though, because, you were stubborn, and
yes.
and you kept listening at doors. Hey, I'm not judging you.
Yes,
I did that too. I pretended to be asleep a lot.
Yes, I relate. I relate. Mm-hmm.
I didn't learn as interesting stuff as you did that way, but still, I did learn lots of the family secrets that little kids aren't supposed to know, and that that's a thing that kids do. We're curious, and kids at that age are especially curious. And you get to be curious not just about what you're learning in school, but everything, because you want to make sense of how all of this works. And you had your teacher, who went by the title Comrade. So
that's how we were talking to the teacher. I mean, you don't say ma'am or miss. So it was like, Comrade such and such. So you step up there, take a nice, upright position and say, Comrade such and such, and you start addressing. So it was getting pretty militarized, politicized, certainly. It wasn't as bad as in our neighboring country, the ex-Soviet Union, because we have a big common border with the ex-Soviet Union. So there was a lot of pressure on, our government from theirs. So they also made sure that Romania stays in line with. So a lot of stuff was imported.
Oh yeah,
transplanted, implanted with no choice over.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the same for a lot of the Eastern Bloc countries at the time.
Yep.
And they were all little variations, but it was the same common thread of authoritarianism. And that's, I think this is like at the core of the book, is that when you are a child in an authoritarian country with an authoritarian regime, with stuff like secret police and security services and all of that stuff. Yeah, okay, we've got the CIA, but they don't follow kids to school and crap. I mean, I know that the conspiracy theory people are going to be like, yes, they do. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh, no, forget
just
about
go over there. No, they didn't. And they don't. We have that stuff, but it's not the same. And it's one of the things that I found so crucial to the message of this book is these things are not only dangerous. Magic is not only dangerous because it's dangerous. Like, as you said, illness, death, honestly, insanity.
Yes,
you can lose your mind essentially if you play around in a stupid way. So it's not just that; it's that other people recognize it as dangerous and want to stamp it out.
Yep.
And that was, I mean, look at the Catholic Church. For centuries, they knew darn good and well that stuff worked and that it was dangerous. So they stamped it out. The only person allowed to do things like transubstantiation was the priest.
Yes.
That's the only person. And by the way, he was the only one who could read the Bible because he was the only one who was taught Latin. And so all of this stuff, they kept it all together. Now, instead of doing it that way, the Romanian government did it the other way, which is stamp it straight out just by going, no, you don't believe. It's like a giant gaslighting session. Like, you can call authoritarianism a case of gigantic gaslighting, where you tell your citizens, you didn't see that doesn't exist.
Yes. Yep.
This is how we think of things. That is how we do not think of things. And if you don't think of things the way we do, we're just going to keep.
We'll help you.
Yeah,
we'll help you see it the right way.
Yes, because in a way, the ones who are true believers believe they are helping you, and this is actually this is why
Absolutely.
a lot of evangelical Christian communities are really into this whole witnessing to non-Christians, because they truly do believe that these people are going to go to hell when they die, and they want to save them, and in their mind, they are helping them. Same thing. It's
the exact same thing. I mean, I remember, and they tried to make, and they were actually making programs for children that were super appealing for the mind of a young child. They were, and I had many among my friends who were themselves and their families were completely sold out on this materialistic, strictly 100% materialistic, pragmatic view of the world. And I remember how they were telling kids that, oh, but you have the power, and that's nothing more intelligent and stronger than the human mind. Look how we subdue the forces of nature, and we create electricity in this plants, using water power. And look how magnificent is the human mind, and there's nothing about the human mind. And with that, it began the erosion in the belief of any other power or force outside the human as a person. And then, of course, as a person, you have to listen to the reasoning of other persons who are above you and who supposedly know better. So, and that's dangerous. And what you said, I really like what you said about the Catholic Church and believe church and Christian or monotheistic religions in general, but Christianity particularly, because in its advancing, it took on so much from the pre-Christian beliefs. I mean, if you look in old manuscripts of recorded handwritten prayer books that also incorporate healing charms, and you see there, I believe this is from Laknunga, from this Leech book, and there are prayers there that it's like calling for God's name and Jesus, and then the addition of deities, or
they're saints now.
They're saints, but back then they were called. And this is not Laknunga, a different term, where Odin or Wotan was called, and then later down in the charm does Jesus or God, the Christian God, mention. So things started to blend. So they realized that there are better ways to convince people by presenting them, hey, your deity and our deities, they kind of mishmash together, and then gradually beginning to erase the other and pushing your own agendas, and then limiting, okay, the only ones who can do this are the ones who we give them the power and the authority to do so, and these are the priests. Funny thing in Romania, I actually so there the predominant religion is Christian Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, and I'm not gonna tell what I find flawed with that. I mean that would take us like a whole episode.
Yeah, but you can give a little bit.
So, well, I don't like the blatant anti-Semitism that is present. If you hear, you know, the preaching of John Chrysostomo, that's the Greek name, the John Golden Mouth. So he's very, very virulent in his preaching against Christianity and against pagans in general. So there are those aspects that I do not like, and I never felt like I was belonging with that, you know, Christian view of the world. But when Christianity took roots in Romania, the pre-Christian, many of them were deeply, deeply, deeply ingrained, and people would not let go of them. And for example, beliefs in fairies and medicine women and medicine men, witches, working with fairies. So we have there the name, it's an equivalent of the fairy seer. I don't have exact translation for it, so I'm using fairy seer as the best, you know, closest name. And as such, now also consider that many of the priests were coming from the countryside, from the village. And they themselves grew up with beliefs in fairies and things that were near and dear to their families, to their grandparents, to their great-grandparents. So growing an ecclesiastical class, so to speak, this is before communist times, when we didn't have much of an ecclesiastical class growing. So having this class growing, where this profession growing with roots into their heritage, led to a very interesting solution. I would call it compromise solution. These priests weren't really 150%, not all of them, convinced that all beliefs must be eradicated. So we end up in Eastern Orthodox Christianity with fairy holidays and fairy festivals incorporated into the church calendar. And there are groups of fairies, two major groups of fairies in Romania, Rusalii and Sânziene, which I bring about in the book and discuss there. And both of them have their holidays acknowledged, big red letters in the church calendar of holidays, and they are under the name, it's Feast of Rusalii and Feast of Sânziene. A lot of the ancestor cult and ancestor veneration practices have been incorporated into the church calendar. So we were really, really lucky there to have more of this syncretic blend and having a little bit of, you know, best of both worlds, except for what I said, you know, there is a misogyny and there is an anti-Semitism to the old, you know, to the patristic writings, the church fathers. I'm quoting again bunny ears here, fathers, founders. So that is something that's very repelling, repulsive. I find it blatantly, absolutely repulsing. So that's that. But then the overall, a lot of the practices that we had from the pre-Christian past survived because they were incorporated into Christianity. How does this go along with the communist, with the authoritarian regime, and again the materialistic view that was imposed on us? The older generations, for most part, they knew how to play along with whatever the leadership wanted, but deep down they wouldn't really buy it. So it was all a masquerade, you know, really. So to see them talking with comrade this, comrade that, and then in private conversations over the phone, oh, madam, sir, which were not really allowed in
Mm-hmm.
conversations, at least in official settings. You wouldn't use those terms. So, and then our parents, who were like an in between, some of them still connected with their families, their own parents, grandparents from the countryside, who are still very much connected to the old traditions and lore and folklore. And these parents of ours, like my own, living in the city, educated in universities, and bombarded with the information that was fed to them. So they were really at loss.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wasn't aware so much of that as a child. I mean, I could see the duality, but I couldn't really, pinpoint the way I can do now, looking in retrospect and as an adult, that I've seen and lived through quite a bit. So for me, it was extremely disorienting.
Mm-hmm.
At school, you're told, be yourself, tell the truth, have the courage to take responsibility for your own deeds and words. Be brave, stand up and speak your mind. And then the reality that I was confronted with, keep your mouth shut, because if you're going to speak up your mind and stand up for your truth, we'll end up all in jail. And you possibly in some sort of foster care, to be re-educated, whatever. So I just didn't know what to believe. And for a young child, it is a really, really dramatic, very unsettling place to be. And I'm discussing in the book how I made sense of how I started to make sense of my world and not feel guilty, not feel ashamed that I can only say half truths,
Right.
depending on whom I was talking to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was
That's hard on
it's really
kids.
bad.
It's
Yeah,
really hard on
it
kids
is.
to be told one thing by outside authorities and another thing from your familial authorities. You know, you want them to at least agree some, and with your parents, they did seem to kind of agree with the authorities on the outside, but not really.
Yeah, no,
And
they just
kids-
want us to be safe.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
kids can
just-
sense that, even if it's not stated out up
Yeah.
front. And one of the horrible things about being told in school, hey, say your mind, speak your truth, stand
Yes.
up, be proud of what you understand, is okay. So I'm going to bring up Maoist China here. There was, right before the Cultural Revolution, there was a political, they called it the Campaign of the Thousand Flowers. And it's because it's poetics. The Chinese people like poetic stuff, and that makes it nice. And it sounds very similar to what the authorities taught you. But the Campaign of the Thousand Flowers was all about, let's let 1,000 flowers of intellect and understanding and knowledge bloom in our beautiful country,
Exactly.
our unified country. And everyone will have an opinion. Please state your opinions. We have freedom of the press. We have freedom of information. Yeah, no. Because what happened, that lasted about, I don't know, 6 months, a year or something. Long enough for the people who did stand up and write, newspaper articles or magazine articles or books or whatever, expounding upon their own philosophy. It was long enough for somebody in the clerk's office to write down their names and addresses.
Yes, exactly.
And when they were done with blooming, when when the flowers all went to seed and those seeds could have dispersed, all those books disappeared. The newspaper articles disappeared, magazines disappeared, and so did the people. The
I was
people
about
were,
to say, and the people disappeared.
the people were
Yeah.
taken to re-education camps.
Yeah, that's exactly how. And actually, when I grew up, the government, the modeling, it was very much modeled. So they liked a lot what was happening in China.
Mm-hmm.
And we even had this monumental shows on stadiums, where you have the president standing there and waving at everybody. And we were like taken, it was part of our summer vacation sometimes, and we were taken there, to perform all these shows and displays.
Mm-hmm.
It
That's how they
started
use
to,
the.
yeah,
That's how they use the
the
performing
propaganda.
arts against
Hmm.
people.
Yeah.
This is really hard for Americans to understand, and that's why, as I was reading this book, I was like, "This is important." And even if you don't give a rat's patoot about fairies, I kind of think you should read it because it shows how, if you have an authoritarian government and they want to make people think their
Oh, they
way,
can. They will.
everything is geared towards doing that. And it can be the harmful way of making people disappear and go to the camps. It can be in the harmless air
Yeah, I mean,
quotes,
they can
the
make it very
harmless way.
alluring.
Yeah.
Very alluring, very interesting. You end up liking it, enjoying it so much, and they give you the sense of they're very good at giving. So again, it was very much about training the younger generations and making you feel very important. And
Yeah.
we had this beautiful free camps. So we would go for, to camps for free. And you are given all kind of assignments. You're going to take care of this. You're going to take care like little leadership roles. And this is how we want our young communists, to train and to grow. And we had a lot of fun, honestly, while this mentality was trickled into us. And as a child, you're just into that, oh, I'm having so much fun. This is so cool. This is so great. Maybe these grown-ups don't really get it, but I think this communist thing is a really cool thing.
Yeah.
And then when you grow up a little bit more and life really comes at you and you're out of the childhood bubble and there are no more free camps, and real life in a totalitarian regime can be extremely hard.
Nerve-wracking.
So then, nerve-wracking. Plus, considering from the economic standpoint, considering that the government decides where you are going to go and work.
Yep.
So you finish your college degree, your college, whatever education, and then you don't go and search for a job wherever you want and wherever it suits you. The government gives you, assigns you the position. And that can be in a place where you really, really don't want to be. Like the opposite side of the country, away from your family and nobody cares. This is where you are sent and this is where you are going.
Yeah.
So you have zero control over that. And a lot of people having to get married during the college years. So the moment they would graduate, it was called a repartition. So the repartition took into account married couples, so they wouldn't split them apart and they would send them in the same place. And the reasoning behind that was, well, if I'm going to be sent in who knows what teeny tiny village or very, very lonely place where the closest house, let's say that I'm a doctor, and I'm going to be sent to work into a country small clinic. I'm studying, medicine, 6 years. I'm going to get my repartition in that place, which is all fine. I mean, we need doctors in the small places. The problem is that place is so isolated that I'm not even sure I will be able to find a spouse and set up a family and all those kinds of things. So then, by necessity, it was that. plus the policy of speaking reproductive rights. You have zero reproductive
Yep.
rights. The state decides how many kids you're gonna have.
Yeah.
So
And yeah. And
so the state decides.
yeah. There's another book. It's out of print, but it is interesting, and I think it's one of the things that taught me at an early age what totalitarianism is like for children. And it's called Mischling Second Degree, and it's by the author Ilse Cohen. And it talks, it's a memoir, again, of growing up in Nazi Germany. And she had one grandparent who was born Jewish, but who repudiated the religion and became what they call a free thinker. So they were basically not of any religion, which is, really dangerous in a totalitarian place, because then they'll say you're of this religion or whatever.
Yeah, you
whether
have to
you
be.
are or not. And this girl essentially hid in plain sight by her mother divorcing her father. It was his mother who was technically born with one Jewish parent. So in divorcing him, not because she wanted to, but to protect their
Survival.
child.
To protect the child, yeah.
And so essentially she was hidden in plain sight, and she had to join Hitler Youth. And when we look at films of Hitler Youth from the time period, when we see the kids in the uniforms, especially the boys, you very seldom see the girls, but they had uniforms too, and they had meetings too, and they did things. There is a passage where she tells her father, she still visits her father secretly, and he says, I hate to see you in that uniform. And the only reason he wasn't sent to a camp was because he was an electrician who worked with the large electrical producing stations and the high tension cables, and he was one of the experts in the field. So, by the end of the war, he was needed every day to fix the things that the bombing stopped, So every time, he'd have someone say, well, I'll shoot you tomorrow. And he'd be like, yeah, sure you will. Okay. I'll go fix the
Shoot
thing.
me and you're shooting yourself in the leg, you're...
Yeah, I'm your guy. So he was very lucky in that sense.
Yes. I agree.
Anyway, he said, I hate to see you in that, but I know you have to do it to fit in. And she said, well, it's not like they do anything with us. It's just they teach us songs and we play games.
Exactly.
And we make crafts and, and he was like, all of this is meant to teach you their values. And as you get older, it's going to become less games, less songs, less dancing, and more actually upholding the regime.
Yes.
And, at that point, you had to be so careful. Again, just like you did, you can't say anything outside of your house. Can't write anything down. That's another thing I noticed is, once you start getting taught by your grandmother, or before you start getting taught by your grandmother, you wrote down what you experimented with and what you experienced. And that was taken away from you. So then, clever girl, you figured out where to hide stuff. Well, I'm going to put it behind a picture, and I'm going to put it under the rug. But I'll spread it out so it doesn't make a lump in the middle, because that was figured out, So that is what she also had to do. And that is what you have to do. You have to hide yourself. And that's what you did. And that is something that I think Americans do have problems understanding, that for survival's sake, for safety, you have to become clever and you have to become flexible, and you just have to learn to dodge and
absolutely
not tell the truth, but make it look like the truth, which means you have to kind of act out the truth a little bit so that it's convincing. And you basically learn to be what we would say in the movies, a spy. You're basically hiding yourself.
That's so to the point.
In plain sight. And then we throw in magic and fairies, and boy, they like secrecy too, don't they? They do.
They do. I mean, that is one of the things, that made me think and got me pondering and considering. Okay, even before we had an authoritarian regime and all that, in my grandmother's youth, by the way, my grandmother lived to be 102.
Oh.
So we had a lot of time together, and she was around for a really long time, which means that she had the experience of living in both worlds, prior to an authoritarian regime taking power and before that. So even before that, she told me these are teachings that are practiced in secrecy. This is not something that you go political considerations or safety considerations from that, social standpoint or not. These are things practiced with a degree of secrecy. And teachings are not just handed down freely. So there's usually a grandmother, an elder who initiates and teaches, trains, usually a grandchild, not so often one of their own children, although sometimes that happens. So, yeah, and it looks like they do have a penchant for secrecy.
Yeah.
Fairies themselves. I remember being told, and then having had experience with it firsthand, when a fairy comes and tells you, you're not supposed to tell us, you're not supposed to discuss this with anybody. And I read a lot in Irish lore, in Irish fairy lore, about people receiving gifts from fairies and being told this will only last for as long as you keep it a secret. And as soon as the person goes and brags about, oh, I got this from a fairy guide or fairy whatever encounter, the gift is gone. Whether it's good luck, whether it's financial abundance, whether it's a gift, like music or ability to make poetry, that's gone.
Yeah.
So whatever it was, you don't keep your mouth shut, you lose it. So
Morgan Daimler tells the story of how that happened to her. And I think actually pretty much any of us who've worked with fairies in any capacity can tell some kind of story about, well, when they say keep your mouth shut, they're not kidding.
No, they're not.
And yes, sometimes the punishment is physical. And you go, oh, well, I screwed that up, right?
And I have to put the pieces back together and get learn from my mistakes. And that's a lot of that.
But yes, so, I the dichotomy of secrecies, the numbers of secrecies that are in this book. Not only is it makes the story super interesting, because it's kind of like a detective novel in a way. There's levels of who knows what, and you gotta pretend to be Agatha Christie and go, okay, so does this person know this and that person? Especially when your grandmother is doing her healing practices. Because, okay, I love this. She's pretty well known, right? Throughout that local area. And I'm not talking a little tiny county. She's known out in some villages. Out in the boons, as we call them, the boondocks. And but nobody, of course, talks about it openly. Like, well, grandma over there, by name, we're going to use her name, and she's really awesome. No, it's like this, underground,
exactly.
telephone communication system. And there are code words. There's, you know, you have to like, you know, you want to help people, but you also don't want to fall for someone pretending to be sick just to smoke you out. So she has her friends who practice with her, and they all scope people out.
Yes.
And, you know, let's talk about China again. When they had their one-child policy, there was an official, unofficial title called the Granny Police. And the Granny Police worked for the government. And they were the older women who were always in everybody's business, knew everything about everybody. And they were the ones who would find out if somebody was pregnant and wasn't supposed to be. And then it would be reported. And then she would help, see, more of those air quotes, help the young woman do the right thing and either abort the child, give the child up for adoption, or, you know, whatever, to keep that in place. And it was an open secret as to who they were, but they communicated along with each other. And some of them were like double agents because they would help women be able to keep at least their sons, you know, because male children were valuable for how, you know, your daughter, you raise your daughter and she goes off to her husband's family when she gets married. She's no longer helpful to you, but a son is always helpful to the mother and father. That has to do with patriarchal society. So I was fascinated to watch the underground information gathering and disseminating group that surrounded your grandmother, kept her safe, allowed her to practice her medicine, and helped the community and kept the community safe. Because even if you accepted healing from someone, you weren't safe. Even your own father might rat you out. So that was phenomenal. And it goes right along with fairies. You know, nobody, you know, Ireland, nobody really talked out loud about, oh, well,
Fairies.
Because they didn't like to be talked about because you respected that about them. You didn't do anything stupid that would make them angry with you. And then it was, you know, when there were times when the church was really down on it, or when the English were really down on it governmentally, then it brought attention from quarters in the human world that you didn't want attention. So there's just levels and levels of secrecy happening here.
Yeah, I want to add to that. Speaking of ratting out, there's a lot. There's so much that I could not. Okay, so I could not include in the book because there is a limited space, you know, pages, words that you can fill in and get your work, you know, published. So, and also it wasn't like really. It was more like tangent to the subject that I was trying to preserve, this transmission of knowledge and practices of fairy seers from one generation to the other, and what a child can do with magic. So one of the things that's not very clear in the book, it may somehow emerge like a scent, but not really like a clearly stated something, is the ability of these ladies, these witches, to know when someone is ratting out, and to eventually find who might be the person ratting out, and if somehow it happened, to be able to contain the damage. That's how we ended up with the visit from security. My aunt knew about it, so when she looked into both her cards, she used to read poker cards, and also read the coffee cups, the bottom of the coffee cup. So in doing that, she knew that something's coming. And therefore, we were prepared for the worst, and that worst didn't happen. It didn't. They didn't catch us with anything, which was very lucky. So those little, they're not really little. Those things convinced me that those practices, those divination practices, are real. It was not a game. It was not a play pretend. It wasn't a charlatan's scheme to try to fool people. This was a matter of life and death. And those divination practices saved, I want to say saved the day, saved our necks in the most literal sense. So I can testify to the power that such practices done by genuine practitioners, well-trained practitioners, how powerful these practices can be. Speaking to the levels of secrecy, I want to go back to the fact that we have layers of believers in the right and true order, with the elderly being really reluctant to embrace that because they're old enough and they saw the country moving through various transitions, through the wars, between the wars, the after the wars, the coming of the communist regime, the monarchy that we had before the regime. So they saw it literally all. So they're not so much sold out on the idea of, communist and renouncing completely private property, and so not really. Then you have the middle layer, the in-between generation, the parents, who some of them are more into that, some of them are, so they don't really know. And then you have the children literally torn apart by, what am I going to believe, my grandparents, my parents, or what I'm being taught at school? And everybody starts taking sides and aggregate around the nucleus that they feel more resonant. So statement of the obvious, I aggregated around grandmother as the nucleus. So I really felt drawn toward following and believing that side of things. Another level of secrecy, in case you haven't had enough layers until now, there's one more. The Christian church in Romania, differently from what happened in the Soviet Union, was left fairly alone. Why? Because priests had to teach about what a great country we live in and how fabulous are the party leaders, and have congregation pray for the health and well-being of the party leaders who are taking care of us and guiding us. So that was that. Second, the church paid huge amount of money to the government to be left alone. And fourth, those priests who are free thinkers, and because there were a lot of, or quite a few of free thinking, free spirited, even among the Christian, who are like upholding values that were not in line with the communist, with the whatever. So those were killed. So killed or sent into camps from where they never came back, basically. So the repression of religious leaders was much stronger in the early years, when the communist regime really took a hold of the power. It kind of lessened a little bit, even among members of the ruling, I'll call it elite, because this is what it was, even if they wouldn't take it. It was like this class, small group who amassed privilege and power. So that would be an elite. And many of them had relatives. They came from the countryside with grandparents and maybe, among their relatives, uncles, who were priests. So even among that ruling, dominating political elite, not everybody was blatantly against. Even among those, some were really, really bent on the values of a materialistic philosophy and, the authoritarian regime and how good it is to keep order this way. So some of them were, but some were not. Some were not. Some were still people who would cross themselves before leaving to work in the morning. Some of them were people who would still baptize their kids in secrecy, privately, have something done at home. This is how my parents, because my grandmother, she was a Christian. I mean, I'm not a Christian, but my grandmother was. As a kid, for example, I saw no problem, and it's like, okay, there's a Christian God, and then that's these other deities. I really liked Frau Holle, and celebrate and honor goddess Frau Holle each time it snowed. So I didn't see a problem of having, gods and goddesses and the Christian God and the fairies and spirits of the land and having a big party there. And I also noticed was this pretty little church where my grandmother used to go, and I used to like going with her there. And I was looking at the prayers and the incense that's being burned, and I was like, they're doing the same thing that we are doing at home. Why is it okay to do it in church? It's not okay to do it in your own house by yourself. So big confusion right there. And I noticed that the priest, the local priest, didn't really like grandma. So my grandmother was just minding her own thing, and she would go to church and say, well, the relationship with the divine, however you perceive the divine, that's personal, so it doesn't really go through the priest. So we had to keep it secret from the priest as well, who was aware that grandmothers was doing things, but not to a level that would really prompt him to go and complain to any kind of authority. So yeah, it was very complicated life, honestly.
Yeah, it was. And I love that the Eastern Orthodox Church had sense enough to essentially pay off the government to leave them basically alone. So long as they did this thing or the other thing for the government kind of went, oh, okay, yeah, you're harmless. We're not gonna, okay, okay. And you are absolutely right. In an authoritarian regime, it always is a ruling class, a privileged class, and they bend the rules for their friends and relatives all the time. It doesn't matter what country you're in. That's how it happens. So there's different levels of what you must do to be perceived as okay with the government. And so long, it's all about who you know.
Yes, and absolutely.
Yeah. And how you negotiate your path through life in that system. It's very complicated. It's not a simple thing. It's not, again, if I was to say what is the theme of this book, it's secrecy. It is what is secret, what is open secret, what is generally known, what is safe to be known, how to be safe. I mean, you talk about the fairies and you explain your experience of the fairies all through the book. I mean, A Fairy Path is absolutely a great title. But it's also about secrets, and it's not just their secrets, it's your secrets and your grandmother's secrets and the church's secrets. And I really got that the priest did not much like your grandmother, and I thought it was amazing that she went to church anyway, because it wasn't any of his damn business what she does with herself. But, there she is also appearing among the other good Christians as a good Christian. So what can the
Yep.
priest do about it? Not much.
Nothing.
Your grandmother was a very, very canny woman. She's probably uncanny too with the magic
Oh, yes,
part.
yes.
But she was really, really intelligent. And, I have the utmost respect for older women, always have. But she is like, I'm like, you go, girl. You go.
I think she's in a sense, she's the protagonist, the main character in the book, dare I say. And the book is dedicated to her. So right there on the first page is to Grandma. And I wanted to say something about the title because some people, so the name Memoir, the word Memoir in the title kind of rubbed them the wrong way. And I was asked, who are you to write memoirs? And I'm like, well, the word memoir there is tongue-in-cheek for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
A 9 years old kid, 10 years old kid usually doesn't write memoirs, but I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's my 9, 10, 11 years old in that book. So it's the memoir of a young fairy seer. Now, how many fairy seers or witches really write memoirs? To my knowledge, nobody.
Or if they do, nobody gets it except the
Or
family or their coven.
If they do, exactly. So that's a very so the memoir there it goes against the grains with some rules.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit provocative,
Mm-hmm.
and it is intended to be provocative, like the rebellious kid in the book itself, who's really provocative and sometimes defying of authority and defying of rules and getting into trouble and learning from that how to stay safe, and the value of secrecy, the value of still standing tall and proud and speaking your truth in a way that benefits you. It's not about saying out blatant lies, but learning at a very young age how to present the truth from a different angle in such a way that you're not harmed by your stating the truth and not harming your family. So it's a lesson in diplomacy, and that's where I did go with this memoir in the title. It's Young Diplomat in Training.
That's the thing. In an authoritarian country, you have to be diplomatic about everything.
Absolutely.
Everything is a balance. It's all like you're like the guys in the circus that balance the plates on poles that spin and then throw them at each other. It's like how do you do that? And I'm gonna take a quick turn here and talk a little bit about the magic itself, because one of the things about traditional witchcraft and traditional magic, shamanic work in a specific culture, is it's almost always some kind of secret.
Mm-hmm.
There are secrets to it. There's only so much that you can tell. Now, currently in the neo-pagan movement here in the United States, there's not as much secrecy. We're out. People know about us. They know where we are. They know where we live, because we hang, triple goddess flags outside of our house, and we wear pentacles on the outside.
Of course.
And
or
that's what we
hammers.
do. Yeah, exactly.
So I'm wearing my Thor hammer here.
Yeah, and I've got a big old moon goddess on my
Oh,
neck.
that's so beautiful.
Yeah, that's Nathor. So she's the Nile and the moon goddess from pre-dynastic Egypt. So she's I've got the old lady on there. She's really, really ancient. But what's going to happen if there really does become a Christian nationalist government, not just a movement, but a government or a military that is guided by Christian nationalist, white nationalist leanings. That's where I say to neo-pagans, grab yourself a copy of Daniela's book, grab yourself a copy of Michelin Second Degree, and read and absorb that kind of mindset.
In the grim, yet not so completely unlikely possibility for us ending up with a regime that's run by fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism, and white supremacist political military regime, I would say that such books become survival guides.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, honestly, at the time I wrote the book, I didn't write it with such a bleak outcome in mind, but now I cannot ignore the possibility. So that is a survival guide in the sense that teaches how to operate when you have to navigate this intricate maze of expectations and what's true and valuable for yourself, and whom you can rely upon and whom you cannot rely upon. So it's a very complicated maze that needs to be navigated, and I think the book really helps. Now, I'm trying to see it from the perspective of an outside, someone who's not involved. Because okay, that's about me. I'm involved. I'm part of that. I can only be objective to a certain degree. But if I'm trying to see it from your perspective, for example, Barbara, from the eyes, the outsider, I believe there's a lot in there that warns about the possibility. What is it to come if people insist in bringing it about, and warns about that these things are not to be taken lightly. Decisions that one makes have very wide-reaching impact. It goes beyond the personal level and the nuclear family. It reverberates across the society, and it can change, I don't want to say forever, but at least for a very, very, very long time, life as we know it, because once people get hold onto power, they're not going to let it go easily.
No.
And it's easier to prevent something from happening than having to take
reverse
it down.
Yeah.
Reverse it once it happens. And the takedown reversal process, it's very difficult. We can have a completely separate episode on how that is, but it usually generates a bloodbath.
Yeah, it's not. It's not pretty.
I saw it. I was part of that. So it's not pretty. It's not pretty. It's not safe. The outcome is not guaranteed.
No.
Again, you mentioned China, Barbara, before. The outcome is not guaranteed, and it may not succeed.
Yeah.
It may just fail.
Yeah.
Flat.
Yeah. And now there's going to be listeners going, she's lost it. She's gotten paranoid. It's like, no, y'all, you don't even know. I was born paranoid. So just understand that this has always been in the back of my head. Why do you think I have studied all of these regimes? So,
and it would be so nice to just worry without having like a really, really strong reason to worry, and see over the next few years that, it was a phase. It was a phase, when people really leaned into this fundamentalist. There is a pre-emergence, a resurgence of that, but it's kind of, we're finding a place of balance, the past and the present and the pre-Christian and the Christian, they harmoniously learn to coexist, and it's all good. So it would be very nice. I mean, that's always a possibility. But it's also good to consider that any outcome is possible, still possible. Everything is on the table
Everything is in flux right
for the
now.
taking. Everything is out for the taking. So
Yeah. I mean, let's also be realistic. Let's talk about another secret. You and I both do divination.
yeah.
And sometimes, most of the time, it's small things that you catch. Oh, you're going to be able to go to college because you get accepted, blah, 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 But that's a big thing for one person, but it's a small thing in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah.
Or, okay, you're having problems with your marriage.
Yeah.
What? Just tell me, because it's right there. I can see it. Okay, you're not going to tell me? Okay, I will tell you. And then, of course, they tell you, okay, yeah, you were right. Okay, so let's talk about that. That is, again, a big thing in a small sense. Like, it is not going to change the whole world. And then you get those readings, and they usually are repeated, which are about the big things. And that's when you call your friends who also do divination and go, hey, did you get have you done the cards recently? Have you gotten a rogue like streak of saying the same thing with huge, major arcanas? Have you had a dream recently? Like, we have a mutual friend who's like, I had this weird dream last night. Did anybody else have weird dreams? And then, it turns out that several of us had similar dreams or connecting dreams. Yeah. So it's one of those things. I've always been somewhat paranoid because of various things from my childhood. But I've also been receiving warnings from outside, and other people have. So, I mean, I'm not saying anything is set in stone. It's not.
Yeah.
As I said before.
That's the beauty of things, you do divination and you get like signals about the potentiality. You don't get certainties.
Yes.
That's a potential. And if you act on that potential, then you can stir things in one direction or another.
That is the value of divination. And your aunt, Miss, I'm going to see that in the cards.
Miss Camellia, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to look at that and go, oh, y'all. Fam, come on. We need to do some stuff here. And I love that she's not well regarded necessarily, but when she says, I saw this in the cards, everybody, boom, ears perk up, everybody's listening. They know what she can do. And so they may not look at her favorably on her personal life, but they know her skill. And they respect that and listen. Amazing story. So she said that, and it didn't come to pass. You all did the things that you had to do to make it not come to pass. It was still nerve-wracking. I was
about
scary.
to blow it.
Yeah, and
I was about to blow it.
As a little kid, I was like, oh my God, how could a little kid? But you got it. You did it. You did it right. As we say in my family, you did the thing, you did it right, you didn't fuck it up, and it worked. So that's a good story from there that has a happy ending. Although the whole time I'm sitting there, I start reading faster. So what happens? Obviously, it didn't destroy everything because she was here to write the book, but still. And I want people to understand I am not slamming Christianity itself. I have a lot of Christian friends, a lot of people who are very loving and who are just as worried about the potentiality of a Christian Reconstructionist, white supremacist group, a minority of our country at that, coming together and creating just a huge mess in our country. It's not just every Christian. No. Most of the Christians are like me and
Absolutely.
you going, oh, no.
Exactly.
We don't need to go
like
there.
my grandmother, like my grandmother, like my mother, like so many other people whom I know, and just lovely beings with the healthiest possible values regarding the human being and the sense of honesty and respect for
each other,
one another. Yeah, absolutely. So no, My concern is not with someone's beliefs or religion, whatever those may be, is the fundamentalism.
Yeah.
When you take things down to extreme and you become a fundamentalist, I don't care whether you're a pagan, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're
A
Jew,
communist.
a communist. If it boils down to fundamentalism, that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Super conservative and fundamentalist in your values, that already says that it's only my way
Mm-hmm.
and everyone else is wrong.
Yeah. That's the recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And that is antithetical. My God, I just made up a word. That is antithetical to the values that were written into the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So
yeah,
it's not a good thing, and it's antithetical to what's in most Christian teaching. So
yeah,
let's be honest here. Mm-hmm. I am of the opinion that we need to join up with pretty much everybody. And stand up and say no. And I think
Agreed.
that you basically wrote a book that says that in a way that you don't, you pick this up, you go, oh, neo-pagan is a fairies, it's a magic, a seer. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's divination. And oh my goodness. This is not just that. That's all. It's a bunch of other things. And so that's why I suggest to everybody, read this book, learn as much as you can from it. And she's going to come out with another one, I'm pretty sure, that's going to go more into the magic aspect.
Yes.
But you can't understand her magic as well if you don't understand where it arose from. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing. You're coming from a culture that is different than where you were living now in the United States. Mm-hmm. So your growing up is completely outside of our reference. It is different. And your tradition of fairies is different. How many people in the United States go, oh, fairies, where do they come from? Oh, they come from Ireland. They come from Scotland. They come from England. No, they come from all over the world, you know, and Romania is one of those places.
Yeah. I mean, some come from, we have like fairy beings coming from the north, from the Germanic cultures, and they are here. I had encounters with, going to Ireland and expect to encounter, knowing my propensity to run into fairy beings and related shenanigans, I expected to encounter and somehow interact or whatever has you with the Sidhe, the local, the Irish Sidhe. Nope. Alfar. So around Dublin area and within Dublin itself, the presence, what I interacted with and experienced came from the Alfar, from the Norse Alfar. So they come from everywhere. They're not totally bound to geography. So we have this migration of people from our world, consensus reality, and the other as well. So
and if you think about it, if we're talking about magical beings, why in God's name would they be stuck in one place?
It doesn't make any sense.
If they can travel at will, if they can dematerialize and materialize, if they can move through reality like swimming in air, if they can do all these things, why do they stay in one place? They don't.
They don't. Yep,
that's the answer. Occam's razor, if we're going to take fairies as a real thing, Occam's razor would say probably it's not, but it doesn't matter. But if you take that logical thought, well, if they are magical and can do this, that, and the other thing, then they are not going to be bound by any human expectation. They are a non-human intelligence. They are people.
Exactly.
How many human people stay put where they were? We've never have. Otherwise,
I
we'd
mean,
all be in Africa and nobody would be anywhere else. We would all
That's a
have
good
dark
point.
skin. We would all be in Africa, and that's where we'd be. You know, that's not what happened. It hasn't happened from the beginning. It's not going to happen until the end of time. We're going to keep moving around. We're going to go into space eventually. And, you know, that's not a very hospitable environment, but we're still going to do it because that's what people do.
Go everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to add something about the book because those of our listeners didn't see it or only now learn about it. There might be the impression that the book has very little magic compared to the rest of it. And I want to say that that's not the case.
Oh, no, not true at all.
You're going to see there my grandmother in action.
Mm-hmm.
Like a full depossession situation when I was around, and I'm telling it in the book, I'm repeating it now. My knees were rubber.
Yeah.
So when I witnessed and I saw that and I participated into that. There's also all kind of charms and spells, folk magic, throughout the book as I participated in it, as grandmother was doing it, and I was just trying to spy on it. And
looking through the keyhole.
Oh yeah, plenty. So Barbara mentioned at some point that I was writing. I had my first little magical journal, and I was trying to record things. And as we discussed, there wasn't a good idea to put things in writing. Anyway, so that got confiscated by my mother for a number of reasons. First, it was dangerous to have things in writing. Just say that somebody comes to search your house and finds a magical, a whole collection of curses and these kind of things.
Yeah.
And second, when you really, really want to have your child distancing themselves from such practices, first thing you would do, you try to destroy their little magical journal. So that was the end of my magical journal. However, I started because I have a really good memory. So I started to recreate and, develop things that I stored on bits and pieces of paper, and eventually recreated a little notebook that I wrote on the cover of it in black ink, Daniela's Book of Magic. So, and found a way to hide it, find a place to hide it. So in the book, there's a whole section at the end, like partly recreated Daniela's little book of magic, with some of the spells in the form that they were back then, especially those whom I remember from Grandma, but some of them changed to also reflect where I am now.
Yeah.
In my practice. So it's still the essence preserves from those years, and the foundation would be authentic folklore Romanian, but also with some added elements of me growing like this wild pagan heathen who has a pretty strong magical practice. So
yeah,
that's also there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna reiterate because I didn't want to give too many spoilers, but your grandmother, when she threw down. I mean, seriously. She dealt with possession. She dealt with a very strong curse. She dealt with healing, very dramatic healing of a child. And she told some, baby kidnapping, undying ones to shove off. In a respectful and ethical manner, but basically
get the fuck off here, because if you come back
right off, y'all. You fuck off still, and when you get there, you keep fucking off until you leave the whole country. Just go. Yeah. She's a badass. I'll just say it. She was very strong, and it's in there. And people are gonna look at this book and they're gonna be like, it's so thin. How can all that be in there? It's because it's well written, concisely written, And it's full of so much knowledge that I can't recommend it more highly. I really think that many people, even if you never do magic, if you do magic, if you want to do with fairies, if you don't want to do with fairies, just read it. And it tells an interesting story too. And it does, the way that history and magic used to be told, how these stories used to be told, was oral history from around the fire. And that's what you basically replicated. All of that folklore that Morgan and Kat and you and I, Josh Cutchin, we all read, those were stories from a first person's perspective that were about things that happened to people that then were passed down. So you basically did that. You gathered your stories and now you're passing it down in print. And you did a great job.
Thank you. I'm so happy and honored and humbled that I was able, to add my voice to the choir, so to speak. That choir of people talking about their own personal experiences and putting personal experiences that some of them are quite intimate. It's your connection with spirit and spirituality. And putting that into a kind of shop window where people can look at it from all angles leaves you, or at least left me, vulnerable. But to afford that vulnerability, you gotta be really strong. Because so putting these things forth for people to see and learn from it, it may leave you with a sense of vulnerability, but actually when you make the decision, you feel actually very strong. Like, yes, I'm strong enough to be able to be open, to open up.
Yeah.
The other thing, what I found, so this book, obviously, it's been with me in my head, in my heart for a very, very long time. And it's not the first book that I wrote, but somehow I was hesitant about putting all this out there because it's very personal. So it's personal with this far-reaching impact, nevertheless personal. And Morgan and Kat were such a big inspiration. So Morgan Diamond and Kat Heath were such big inspirations because I learned, so this was a while ago, I was into paganism. I mean, I was already like a fairly seasoned pagan.
Yeah.
And I wanted to find ways to talk about my own experiences and didn't know exactly how. And then when I read Morgan and Kat, the first thing was, oh, I'm not the only one having encountered this and having encountered that, fairies and spirits and deity, and wow. And people are talking about it. So if I'm going out there and talk about it, I'm not going to be like the strangest thing in the world. Second, look how much I learned and how their stories, their material helped me ground and find my footing on a path that's not necessarily an easy one when you have lots of experiences and you need to still stay grounded and align yourself to social and family and demands and expectations. And in reading their work, I found it of immense help and value. So I cannot recommend enough Morgan Diamond and Catherine's Heath's work. And then I'm like, okay, I can add my voice to the choir. And the more of us, the merrier, and the more of us, the stronger. And the better the world we live in. Let's bring the magic back.
Re-enchant the world.
Magic. Re-enchanting the world. That's kind of mission statement.
Yeah.
Let's re-enchant the world.
Definitely. And right now, the whole pandemic and the aftermath and the 2016 election and the aftermath and January 6th and the aftermath of that.
The aftermath. Yeah.
We really need some enchantment. we need some enchantment. And not just little twee enchantment with sparkles. No, we need the big enchantment.
For every single imaginable reason, we need that enchantment. Whether it's for ourselves, not to succumb self-doubt and, depression, not to succumb to the grim perspective that it's still out there, impossible, undesired outcomes happening. We need enchantment to affect change, and ump the good vibes, so to speak. We need that enchantment to make a difference, to ground and bring forth the most powerful expression of ourselves and make our voices heard. Enchantment couldn't hurt. So we need enchantment by all counts.
Yes. We're gonna end it there because that's a great statement. Thank you so much. It's great to talk with you again. And again, thank you for writing this book. It's one of my favorites, and if I get to meet you sometime, I'm going to bring it with me so you can sign up for me. It has notes in it.
Let's get together.
I wrote notes in it, which I do with all of my stuff. So
me too.
All right.
It's two of us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, that's all for this week's episode of the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. If you have any questions or thoughts about the podcast or would like to come and talk about your experiences of the paranormal, you can contact us at 6djk67@gmail.com. We promise to even answer you, and we are always happy to hear from you. Thank you.